Here is all you will ever need to know about the pseudoscience still in the Wild West called psychiatry. Stay away from this business masquerading as a legitimate practice at all costs. Psychiatry is the only medical practice which does not actively seek a cure for any one of its diagnoses. Patients are usually expected to remain on drugs for their entire life and are made believe that drugs cannot permanently cure someone. Psychiatrists usually never understand much about their patients before prescribing brain damaging drugs, which will leave their patients mentally and physically sick and dependent on these horrible substances. There may be some severe cases where psychotropic drugs may be absolutely needed, but there are so many more cases where people are over medicated or given drugs that are not necessary. The psychiatric system has always been a nightmare, although they claim they have come a long way. Do not believe such a statement. The conditions may have gotten slightly better, but they still do not understand nearly enough about the human brain to be making such alterations to it. Everyone seems to overlook the horrors that this system has imposed on the people. Black people used to be thrown into insane asylums simply for not obeying Jim Crow laws. Certain hospitals used to leave all of their patients permanently living in filth and feces. I've heard many stories of stupid methods being used. Nurses would come and force feed every patient a spoonful from a huge bucket of random pills. There wasn't any rhyme or reason. Lobotomies and other harsh and cruel forms of treatment were performed on patients. Clearly, they have never known how to treat what they call mental illnesses. The majority of people on psychotropic drugs today are stuck in the mental health system and being taken advantage of. Most do not have a choice in the matter. Whether in a psychiatric setting, group home, or incarcerated, drugs are forced onto people by means of threats, ultimatums, and other forms of instilling fear in them. Things can become pretty ugly if they choose not to comply, and court mandates can even be issued to someone who does not wish to follow treatment orders given by a psychiatrist. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders is a handbook used by healthcare professionals in the United States and much of the world as an authoritative guide to the diagnosis of mental disorders. It contains descriptions, symptoms, and other criteria for diagnosing mental disorders. Within this book, there is a diagnosis for almost anything you can imagine. Even something as simple as not being good at math is labeled as dyscalculia. The sole reason why there is a diagnosis for almost everything is strictly for billing purposes. As long as psychiatrists can say that you suffer from one of these disorders, it allows them to bill for it in many ways. Truth be told, psychiatry has grown into a monster of a business. Without fabricating illnesses, misdiagnosing people, or harassing them by trying to force treatment on them, there would not be enough cases out there to bring in even a fraction of the money it does. The big pharmaceutical companies make more money than you could imagine from just psych meds alone. One perfect example of this is how doctors medicate adolescents who are forced to comply by their parents and unaware of the damage being done. Psychiatrists use normal behavioral issues associated with being a child as an excuse to pump these children full of nasty drugs. They end up targeting specific personality types while slapping a diagnosis on a young boy or girl. The facts are that the human brain is not fully developed until after you are considered an adult, which means altering it while it's in its growth state can be detrimental to your mental health. Most of these kids would have grown out of anything these doctors considered to be a mental health problem by the time they were grown. Instead of letting the child grow, these so called professionals tamper with their minds at a young age. This can possibly lead to more severe issues which could have been avoided. Drugs which are commonly given to treat diagnoses such as ADHD have very similar characteristics as cocaine. Do you really want your children on these type of drugs? Doctors who are honest will tell you some of the truth. They will admit that the mentally ill die on an average of 25 years before everyone else. But what is that actually saying? The mentally ill they are referring to are people who have been diagnosed with a mental illness. It's the only way to classify or count such people. Then factor in that mostly everyone with a mental health diagnosis is given some type of psychotropic medication. Now boil that down. It really means people who take psych meds die on an average of 25 years earlier than everyone else. Their lives are truncated by these chemicals. Overall, I have witnessed firsthand the many horrors and the terrible conditions of the psychiatric system. I firmly believe that this system is in need of a complete overhaul. If someone wants to seek a private psychiatrist and inquire about receiving help, let them. But do not force so many people to be prisoners to a doctor or to have drugs forced on them against their will. I have come across so many miserable people who are not being helped in the least by the services they are receiving. A very sick system has been put in place and is in dire need of reform. Isn't it ironic when our doctors are more crazy than our patients?